most influential about Looking Glass games for you?
Um, well, there are so many things. It's hard to even start, but I think uh, I think it boils down to the moment, the mood that those games manage to put me in, which is some constant uncertainty of what was gonna happen, or was I safe or not, or what is this guy gonna do? Is this gonna work, etc. And that felt really, really powerful. And I have to say, I felt that in definitely in Underworld, System Shock back in the days, and for sure Thief. Thief was probably very, very influential to me. But I think yeah, it was the feeling of being able to explore a world with its rules that were consistent, and me finding ways to exist and influence the world in my own way. But then, I could also mention the writing. In the case of Thief, the mood was also very, very well served by the story and the woodsy lords and all that. The way it was, the acting, the audio was amazing. Eric Grotius, I assume, was the lead on that.
Yep.
Yes, he
So
was.
He was a
so
madman.
it's a set of different things, but at the end of the day, that was the most immersive experience ever. And I think that's what somehow, we as a religion, we took on, and that's what we want to bring to gamers again.
Cool, cool. For me, it was much the same. It was that sense of a larger world around you, both in the narrative sense and how it was all expressed through the game systems, like you said. It's a I'm one of the few people in the room who didn't work at Looking Glass. It's hard for me sometimes not to get a little starstruck. I'm emailing with Terry Brosius right now. I'm like, oh, it's you know, I worked at Irrational for a few years, and there's definitely a lot of lessons at Irrational that came from Looking Glass, and it influences me every day. What about for you, Austin?
Well, obviously, I mean, Looking Glass was the touchstone. It for a lot of the people who worked there. Obviously, it was their first job in games, and we we taught each other. We taught ourselves to make games. We taught each other how to make games. Uh, it you know uh, it taught me how to play and analyze a game. I mean, it was it was more educational than any of the various graduate schools I ended up going to after that.
So we have a couple of questions from the fan base. Um, how does storytelling in games relate to traditional drama? Would you like your player to go through a character arc, or how do you think about storytelling? Do you work with acts or scenes? Anyone?
Well, if Austin, you want to take this one?
Sure. I mean, there's a bunch of questions there. Uh, um, having worked in various media, games are very, very distinct. And when I'm working on a game, I think in really almost completely different terms than I think of when I'm working on a novel or a screenplay or or whatever else, right? Um, uh, in, in a sense, a player goes through a character arc, but of course, it's a very, very different experience to manage because a player isn't a character, right? The player is your collaborator, right? So you're thinking about constructing situations that enable them to uh, find meaningful choices or meaningful actions in the world, right? And you think about challenges, uh, and where they go through the experience of uh, failing and improving, the experience of thinking of a strategy, the experience of frustration and then of of feeling powerful. But you're arranging that for them, right? In and mostly I work as a writer, but I'm in collaboration with the art direction and the systems designer and the levels designer. Uh, so in a sense, it's a character arc, but the business of creating that is so different that I think it enables misconceptions to call it something like that.
Yeah, if I can bring my 2 cents,
Mhm.
the story question is so interesting because in our kind of games, the narration is very fragmented. It's not we don't have the luxury of super linear games or a movie where you control the pace of at which you're going to tell the story. So it falls. It's easy to lose the player with that, right? In an environment that is so fragmented. And if you think in terms of story, there's the overall story, which might be the least interesting actually. The one where hey, I gotta save the princess or whatever it is. And then occasionally that story evolves. Level 3, now you found some guy that tells you shit. That part of the story is, for me, even if we can write a nice one, is not really what holds the player. It's good to have it because it's you want to have everything. But then there is another type of storytelling, which is just the definition of the world and letting the player find its own information, overhearing people, and getting immersed in this world and its description, right? So that's another kind of narrative, which to me it's much more interesting. And then the one that is even more interesting of all that is, as a player, what am I doing right now? So right now, I'm hanging on a chain, and then I'm jumping over there, and then I manage to dodge this guy, and so that story is to me more interesting, and the rest gives context to all that.
Yeah, and I would add also, a game can have, especially when we're talking about a game like Dishonored or like Underworld, where there's so much play in the system. You can have a fair amount of control over the overall arc of the plot, right? Ultimately, the most important function that serves is it's the player's call to action. It sets the player in motion. It frames what kind of game are we playing anyway. But so much of the emotional impact of the game comes not in acts or scenes, but just in moments, right? And you can't even control the moments. You have patterns, and you have things that are probable things that can happen, and you can even script around some of those if you feel like they're reliable enough. Which, for example, in System Shock, we did a lot of that sort of thing, with these like scripted little practical jokes on the player that, if enough players fall into them, that's effective. But you think so much more in terms of not what is going to happen specifically, but what kinds of things are going to happen.
Right. And in fact, an example in Dishonored that I think is the maximum of the kind of forced narrative combined with let the player do it his own way is the moment where you have to poison the overseer, the high overseer. I don't know if you remember that, but you have to infiltrate this room where there's going to be a meeting, and you can poison the glasses because they're going to, people are going to meet here and drink some wine together, or you can invert the glasses so that you kill the other one, or you can not do anything, or you can break both glasses, and then there are different ways to get into this room and different place you can hide. And so with all that together, we set up a pretty heavily scripted moment because as designers we have to plan for all that, but the way it's gonna unravel is very unique to each player. And I think to Koshiro's point and conclusion, so writing the situation and the way the player solves himself out of it becomes a narrative. And yes, in the case of the poison scene, that's very, very true.
Okay, so a couple more questions here. Oops, sorry about that. Here, loaded question for everybody in the room. How do you see yourself working with VR? Maybe the hottest issue in our our medium these days. And everybody's going to go no comment.
Uh,
Uh,
I
yeah,
well, I'll only comment say that I hope to do a lot of work in VR and AR because I think that they're amazing. I think they're going to be huge. Obviously, I work at Magic Leap right now, which uh, has its own tech, and it's going to be awesome. And I can't talk about it.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about that, you know, we've seen various iterations of like trying to get various VR platforms into the market. As long ago as like 20 years ago, people were trying to do this sort of thing. You know, I think we're really seeing what looks to me like it could very well finally be the tipping point with that, you know, to where a lot of the fundamental problems that have kept it from breaking out before are looking solvable. And you know, as people, you know, if you look at what people have tried to do within the past, I still don't feel like we've yet, certainly not in those previous generations, seen anyone define VR really as its own medium, as opposed to as a version of the single screen based, you know, video game experience.
Yeah.
Right? We haven't seen the equivalent of the way that the stage play broke out and became its own medium during the development of cinema, right? But it's clear to me that the media are different enough that VR is going to have that kind of transformative moment, and it will, right? I just don't know what it's going to look like yet, which is super interesting.
yeah, and there's no standard, which is probably the. I mean, as a player, I am super excited, interested, etc. And hopefully somebody figures it out. But as a developer, it's you know, it's kind of scary because you don't have the standard where you know that if you're going to develop on VR, you're going to have your two controllers, one per hand. Right now, you have to support the one without it, the one with it, and then there are different standards. So that's kind of scary. Plus, in the kind of games that we do specifically, which is a lot of player exploration, you know, it's hard to imagine a system where you can walk around. That's the real problem. And I don't know if you've ever tried the Valve system where you stand up in a room and you actually physically with your feet move around, take objects, etc. This is super powerful as a user experience. It's very powerful. And but how do you translate this in a game where you actually have to walk more than 6 feet by 6 feet?
Right.
Right, and yes, I have, and so have some of us here, and you know, the interesting thing to me about that, you're right, like that freedom to move around is huge, but you're not going to roam the way that you do in, you know, Dishonored or in a typical adventure game. On the other hand, you know, it's this tremendously intimate experience of being able to, like, you know, you can move your head around and look at things from all angles, look at them close up, things that you really you have to experience it to just understand like how qualitatively different it is than the experience you can get without that platform, right? And that is the thing that convinced me more than anything else that, you know, this is going to lead to entirely new types of games.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm a true believer, but there are big unsolved problems. Obviously, we're looking at one of you could certainly envision giving someone in VR a blink power, right? And then they could move from place to place so that they could only walk a certain distance, but they could certainly travel in the world. Someone's going to solve it somehow.
Yeah. In fact, I've heard that I had this idea too, and I thought I was super smart with it, and then I found out that everybody has the same idea.
Yeah.
So we're all super smart.
So we're all super smart, you know.
So I just
It's
need
a
the.
gathering of genius.
I think we're going to see the return of like actual simulators, you know, the X-Wing simulator, that kind of thing. So you're able to contain the player and have something around him